There's a particular kind of silence that comes after betrayal. Not the peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning, or the comfortable hush between old friends. This silence has weight. It presses against your chest like a stone, fills your mouth with words you can't say, wraps around your throat until breathing becomes a conscious effort. I learned that silence on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Sitting in a conference room I'd helped design, watching a man I'd trusted present my 5 years of work as his own. My name was Dr. Alina Voss, 42 years old, senior researcher at Meridian Biotech. And for half a decade, I had poured every ounce of my intellect, my weekends, my sleepless nights into developing a protein synthesis model that could revolutionize cancer treatment. I'd sacrificed dinners with friends, relationships that withered from neglect. My mother's final months, always promising I'd visit next week, next month, when this phase was done. But Greg Morrison's name was on every slide. Let me take you back to the beginning, before the conference room, before the betrayal. Back when I still believed in fairness. I started at Meridian 7 years ago, fresh from my postdoc, burning with ambition, and naive enough to think hard work alone would carry me forward. The lab smelled of chemicals and coffee, that sharp tang of ambition mixed with desperation that every researcher knows. My workspace was a corner desk near the ventilation system, always too cold, always humming, but I didn't care. I had my microscope, my samples, my notebooks filled with calculations that kept me awake at 3 in the morning. Greg Morrison was my supervisor, 51, silver-haired, with the kind of easy charm that made board members comfortable and subordinates grateful. He had a corner office with actual sunlight, framed degrees from Princeton and Yale, a wedding photo on his desk showing a blonde woman with kind eyes and 2 teenage boys. In those early days, he seemed like a mentor. He'd stop by my desk with coffee black to sugars, the way I liked it, and ask about my progress. Not in the dismissive way some senior researchers do, skimming for sound bites, but with genuine curiosity. Or so I thought. "You have a gift, Alina," he told me once, leaning against my lab bench while I adjusted a centrifuge. "The way you see patterns others miss. That's what makes great science." I remembered feeling seen, validated, stupid. The Cancer Protein Project began as my proposal. I'd noticed something in the literature gap, really, between how certain proteins folded under stress and how cancer cells exploited those configurations for immortality. It was theoretical, risky, the kind of research that could consume years and produce nothing. But I believed in it. Greg approved my proposal within a week. "This could put Meridian on the map," he said, signing the resource allocation forms with a flourish. "I'll make sure you have everything you need. Lab time, equipment, access, budget. You just focus on the science." And I did. God, how I focused. The first year was foundation work. Establishing baseline models, running thousands of simulations, teaching myself programming languages I'd never needed before just to build the computational frameworks. I worked 16-hour days. My apartment became a place I showered and occasionally slept. I stopped accepting invitations from my college friends' drinks, dinners, a weekend trip to the coast. Next time, I always said. When things slow down, things never slowed down. Greg checked in regularly, always supportive, always interested. He'd review my progress reports with genuine enthusiasm, asking questions that showed he understood the work. Sometimes he'd suggest a collaboration with another department, or introduce me to a visiting researcher whose expertise complemented mine. "You're doing incredible work," he'd say, and I'd feel that warm glow of recognition, of being appreciated. Year 2 brought the first breakthrough. I discovered a binding mechanism nobody had documented. specific configuration where the protein S vulnerability window lasted exactly 2.3 seconds longer than conventional models predicted. It doesn't sound like much, but in cellular biology, 2.3 seconds is an eternity. It was the crack in the armor we'd been looking for. I remember running into Greg's office at 11 p.m., practically vibrating with excitement, printouts of the data clutched in my hands. He was still there, working late as he often did, and when I showed him the results, his face lit up like Christmas morning. "Alina, this is extraordinary," he said, studying the graphs with intensity. "Do you understand what this means?" I did. It meant we could potentially target cancer cells during that vulnerability window. It meant hope. "I need to run more tests," I told him, already mentally cataloging the next 100 experiments. "Confirm it's reproducible, test it against different cancer lines, build a comprehensive model." "Take your time," Greg interrupted, his hand on my shoulder. Fatherly. Reassuring. "Do it right. I'll handle the administrative side, keep the board happy with progress reports. You just keep doing what you do best." So I did. Year 3 and 4 blurred together. More breakthroughs, more late nights, more pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. I published preliminary findings in smaller journals, always with Greg as co-author, which was standard for PI-researcher collaborations. He provided institutional support, secured funding, ran interference with administration. It seemed fair. My personal life became a dessert. My last relationship ended when Marcus finally said what we both knew: "You remarried to your work, Alina. There's no room for me." He wasn't wrong. I watched him pack his things from my apartment, feeling sad but also relieved. One less distraction. One less person to disappoint when I missed another dinner. My mother called less frequently. When she did, her voice carried that particular tone of longing, wrapped in understanding. "I know you're busy, sweetheart. Changing the world. I'm proud of you." She died of a stroke on a Wednesday. I was in the lab, running a critical simulation sequence I couldn't interrupt. I got the call from my sister 3 hours later. "She asked for you," Rachel said, her voice breaking. At the end, she kept saying your name. I made it to the funeral. Gave a eulogy I'd written on the plane. Returned to work 4 days later because grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. The project was too important. Too close. Greg sent flowers to the funeral. "Take all the time you need," his card read. I took 6 days. Year 5 was when everything came together. The model was complete. 5 years of data, thousands of simulations, clinical projections that made even our most skeptical colleagues lean forward in their chairs. I had documentation for everything: lab notebooks filled with my handwriting, time-stamped computer files, email chains discussing methodologies, even voice memos I'd recorded at 2 a.m. when inspiration struck and I needed to capture thoughts before sleep stole them. The protein synthesis model worked. Not theoretically, not hopefully, it worked. In controlled environments, we could predict cancer cell vulnerability windows with 94.7% accuracy. We could map intervention points. We had created, essentially, a roadmap for targeted cancer therapy that didn't exist before. 94.7%. I remember the night I ran the final validation test. It was February, almost midnight, snow falling outside the lab windows in thick, silent curtains. The building was empty except for security and me. The computer screen glowed in the darkness, numbers scrolling past as the simulation completed its 10,000th iteration. 94.7%. I sat there in the blue light, watching snow accumulate on the windowsill, and felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Completion, pride, the bone-deep satisfaction of having created something that mattered. I called Greg, He answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the hour. "It's done," I said simply. "The model is complete. And Greg, it's better than we hoped." The silence on the other end lasted just a beat too long. I noticed it, but didn't understand it. Not then. "That's remarkable, Alina," he said finally, warmth flooding his voice. "Truly remarkable. Listen, don't touch anything else tonight. Go home, get some sleep. We'll meet first thing Monday morning and go over everything. This deserves a proper review. I can send you the data now." "Monday," he repeated, firmer this time. "You've earned a weekend, Dr. Voss. Celebrate a little. You've just changed the world." I did go home. Ordered Thai food I was too excited to eat, drank half a bottle of wine, fell asleep on my couch watching snowfall past streetlights. For the first time in 5 years, my dreams weren't about proteins and cellular mechanisms. They were about recognition, about walking into conferences and having people know my name, about my mother's voice. "I'm proud of you." Monday morning, I arrived at the lab at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to present everything to Greg in meticulous detail. His office door was closed, lights off. Unusual, he was normally an early riser. I went to my desk, pulled up the files to review them one more time before our meeting. The files were gone. Not deleted. Moved. Every single document related to the Cancer Protein Project had been transferred to a restricted server I didn't have access to. 5 years of work vanished from my drives overnight. My hands shook as I reached for the phone, dialing Greg's extension. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Greg, it's Alina. The project files are gone from my system. I need access restored immediately. Call me." He didn't call back. At 9:30, his secretary Diane, who'd always been kind to me, stopped by my desk. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dr. Morrison asked me to tell you there's a mandatory meeting at 2 p.m. Conference room. Board members will be present." "What's it about?" He didn't say, but something in her face told me she knew, and she was sorry. The hours between 9:30 and 2 p.m. were archaeological in their slowness. I tried to access the server. Denied. I tried to reach Greg by phone, by email. In person, his office remained locked, dark, empty. I pulled out my physical lab notebooks. At least those were still mine, hundreds of pages of handwritten observations, calculations, insights. I held them against my chest like a shield. At 1:55 p.m., I walked into conference room A. The board was there. 7 executives in expensive suits, faces I recognized from company newsletters and annual meetings. Greg sat at the head of the table, looking calm and professional in a navy suit I'd never seen before. There was a presentation queued up on the screen behind him. A presentation with his name on every slide. "Ah, Dr. Voss," he said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Not at the table against the wall. Observer seating. Thank you for joining us." I was just about to present some exciting news. I sat. My lab notebooks felt suddenly heavy in my lap. What followed was the most surreal hour of my life. Greg presented my work-hour work, he called it, though his name appeared exponentially more often than mine, with polish and confidence. He explained the protein synthesis model as though he'd developed it himself, citing studies I'd found, using language I'd written, displaying graphs I'd generated at 3 in the morning with shaking hands and cold coffee. The board members leaned in, asked questions, praised the innovation. "This could put Meridian at the forefront of cancer research," one of them said, practically glowing. "It already has," Greg replied smoothly. "I've been contacted by 3 major journals interested in publishing. Nature Medicine is particularly eager. Nature Medicine, the holy grail of scientific publishing. I'd fantasized about seeing my name in those pages since graduate school. "And what's Dr. Voss's role been in all this?" asked Margaret Chen, the CFO. She looked at me briefly, a flicker of something curiosity, suspicion, crossing her face. "Alina has been instrumental as my research assistant," Greg said without missing a beat. "Her technical work has been invaluable to the project's success. I couldn't have done it without her support." Research assistant. 5 years. My proposal. My methodology. My sleepless nights and sacrificed relationships and mother's deathbed I didn't reach in time. Research assistant. The stone-weight silence I mentioned earlier. It began right then, pressing against my sternum, filling my lungs with something thick and suffocating. I should have spoken. Should have stood up. Slammed my notebooks on that polished table, demanded recognition. Should have fought. But I was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, outbelieved. Greg was a senior researcher with 20 years at the company. I was a woman in her 40s who kept her head down and trusted the system to reward merit. The meeting adjourned with handshakes and congratulations. Greg's handshake. Greg's congratulations. I walked back to my desk in a fugue state, my notebooks still clutched against my chest, and understood with perfect clarity that I had been used. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten countless cold dinners alone, where I'd spread out research papers while everyone else lived normal lives, and I tried to make sense of what had happened, tried to find the moment where I could have prevented this, the warning sign I'd missed, but there were too many. I'd just been too blind to see them. The way Greg always insisted on being copied on every email, every report. Just keeping the board informed, he'd said. I'd thought it was administrative necessity. Now I understood he'd been building his paper trail, inserting himself into every documented conversation. The way he encouraged me to focus solely on the science while he handled the politics. I'd been grateful. I hated office politics, grant applications, the endless schmoozing that came with research administration. I'd thought he was protecting me, letting me do what I did best. He'd been isolating me. The collaborations he'd suggested, the visiting researchers he'd introduced me to, every single one had been told Greg was the principal investigator, the brilliant mind behind the project. I was just the technician executing his vision. And I'd never corrected them, because it felt petty. Because I thought the work would speak for itself. I pulled out every document I had. Lab notebooks. Yes, but Greg could argue those were company property, that any discoveries made on company time belonged to the institution. My personal computer files backed up, thank God, on an external drive I kept at home. Email chains. Time-stamped photographs I'd taken of breakthrough moments, the kind of documentation any excited researcher collects. It wasn't enough. Not against someone who'd spent 5 years positioning himself as the architect of this discovery. At 4 a.m. on the third sleepless night, I made coffee and opened my laptop. Started searching. Greg Morrison's publication history. His previous projects, his career trajectory. And I found something interesting. His last major publication had been 6 years ago, right before I arrived. Before that, a steady stream of papers, always as primary author, always with junior researchers listed as support. After each publication, those junior researchers seemed to disappear, transfer to other departments, leave the company, move to different institutions. I found 3 of them on LinkedIn. Sent carefully worded messages. I'm currently working with Dr. Morrison and would love to learn about your experience collaborating with him. To never responded. The third, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, now working at a biotech firm in San Diego, replied with a single sentence. Be careful. Document everything. Too late, I thought. But her warning confirmed what I already knew. This was Greg's pattern. Find brilliant researchers, harvest their work, take the credit, discard them when the project concluded. I was just the latest. I went back to work on Thursday. What else could I do? I had bills, student loans from a doctorate that was supposed to guarantee my future, rent on an apartment I barely lived in. Greg was in his office, door open now, all warmth and professional courtesy. Alina, he said when he saw me pass. Come in for a moment. I stood in his doorway, didn't sit. I wanted to thank you again for your contribution to the project, he said. Leaning back in his leather chair, the chair he deoccupied while I worked 16-hour days in a freezing corner. I'm putting together the author list for the Nature Medicine submission. You'll be listed, of course, as what? My voice came out flat. Dead. Third author. It's a strong position, Alina. Most junior researchers would be thrilled. Junior researcher. I repeated the words like they were a foreign language. I developed this model. Every methodology, every algorithm, every validation protocol, that was me. You did excellent technical work. He agreed, his tone patient, patronizing, like he was explaining reality to a child. But I provided the theoretical framework, the institutional support, the strategic direction. That's what principal investigatorship means. You're lying. The words hung in the air between us. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A coldness I'd never seen before. That's a serious accusation, Dr. Voss, and one I'd advise you to reconsider. He leaned forward, folding his hands on his desk. You're upset. I understand. Recognition issues are common among researchers who don't fully grasp the collaborative nature of science. But if you pursue this misunderstanding, you'll find it very difficult to continue in this field. Is that a threat? It's reality. I have 20 years of credibility at this institution. Publications, grants, board relationships. You have 5 years on a single project. He paused, letting that sink in. Who do you think they'll believe? I didn't answer. We both knew. Take the third authorship, he continued, his voice softening into something approximating kindness. It's still a Nature Medicine publication. That's career-making for someone at your level. In a few years, you'll have your own projects, your own recognition. This is how the system works. I turned and walked out. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I left work at noon, went to a bar 3 blocks from the office, and ordered whiskey. Sat there in the dim, beer-scented space while business people had lunch meetings and construction workers played pool. The bartender, a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and silver streaks in her dark hair, poured my second drink without being asked. Bad day, she asked. Bad 5 years. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. I pulled out my phone, stared at it for a long moment, then opened my contacts. Found a name I hadn't called in months. Marcus answered on the 4th ring. Alina. Hi. My voice cracked slightly. I know I have no right to call, but are you okay? You sound, I'm not okay. The admission felt like falling. I need advice. You always understood people better than I did. There was a pause. Then, where are you? I told him. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. He arrived in 15, still wearing his work clothes, architect, firm casual. Button down and slacks, concern written across his face. He'd kept his beard, I noticed. It suited him. We sat in a corner booth. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, the way he always had, the quality I'd taken for granted when we were together. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "Really want. Not what's fair, not what's right. What do you want?" I considered the question. Recognition, credit, my name in journals. The career I'd sacrificed everything for. "I want him to feel what I'm feeling right now," I said quietly. "I want him to understand what it's like to lose everything you've worked for." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then you need to stop thinking like a scientist and start thinking like a strategist." "Tell me about his life," Marcus said, signaling the bartender for 2 coffees. "Not his work life, his actual life. Family, weaknesses. What does he care about besides his career?" I thought about the wedding photo on Greg's desk. The blonde woman with kind eyes. His wife, Catherine. He talks about her sometimes, how she supported him through grad school, raised their sons while he built his career. They've been married 23 years. Does she work? She used to be a researcher too. Gave it up when they had kids. I paused, remembering fragments of conversations. He said once that she was smarter than him. That if she'd stayed in the field, she'd have outshone everyone. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Interesting. So he knows exactly what he's doing to you, because he watched it happen to her. The thought hadn't occurred to me. But yes, Catherine Morrison had been Dr. Catherine Walsh, a promising biochemist who'd published groundbreaking work in her 20s. Then marriage, children, the slow fade from scientific journals into PTA meetings and soccer practices. What else? Marcus pressed. He's careful about his image. Everything is calculated, his clothes, his speeches, the way he networks. He told me once that in science, reputation is everything. That brilliance means nothing if people don't believe in you. So his reputation is his armor. Yes, then that's where you hit him. Marcus leaned back, his coffee untouched. But Alina, you need to understand this kind of thing. It changes you. Revenge isn't like solving an equation. It's messy, personal. Are you sure you want to go there? I thought about my mother's funeral. The empty chair where I should have been sitting during her final hours. The relationships I'd sacrificed. The life I'd deferred. Always promising myself it would be worth it when the work was done. I'm sure. The plan began simply. Research. Not the kind I was used to, cellular mechanisms and protein structures, but human research. I became a detective of Greg Morrison's life. I started with Catherine. LinkedIn showed she volunteered at 3 nonprofit organizations, all science education focused. She gave talks at the local community college about women in STEM. She'd written a blog, abandoned now. Last post from 4 years ago about the challenges of leaving academia for motherhood. I read every post. They were beautiful, thoughtful, tinged with a melancholy she tried to disguise as contentment. One post stood out, written 7 years ago. Someone asked me today if I regret leaving research. The honest answer is, I regret that I had to choose. My husband's career flourished while mine withered, not because he was more talented, but because someone had to be home at 3 p.m. when school let out. Someone had to remember orthodontist appointments and science fair projects. Someone had to be the safety net. I don't regret my children, but I mourn the scientist I might have been. I read it 3 times, feeling something crack open in my chest. Recognition, kinship. Catherine Morrison understood what I was feeling because she'd felt it first. I found her email through the community college website. Sent a message, carefully crafted, authentic. Dear Dr. Walsh, I hope it's all right that I'm reaching out. My name is Dr. Alina Voss, and I'm a researcher at Meridian Biotech. I came across your blog posts about women in STEM and found them incredibly moving. I am currently navigating some challenges in my own career and would deeply value the perspective of someone who's been in the field. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I understand if you're too busy, but I thought I'd ask. With admiration, Alina, she responded within 2 hours. Alina, I'd be happy to meet. How about Thursday at 2 p.m.? There's a coffee shop called Rowan's near the community college. I'll be the one with too many books and not enough hands. Looking forward to it, Catherine. Thursday arrived, wrapped in April rain. I found Rowan's easily a cozy space, smelling of cinnamon and old paper, exactly the kind of place an academic would love. Catherine was already there, sitting by the window with a stack of science textbooks and a mug of tea. She was prettier than her photograph suggested. 50 or so, with laugh lines around her eyes and gray threading through blonde hair she wore in a casual braid. She dressed like someone who'd stopped worrying about impressing people. Jeans, a soft sweater, no makeup. She smiled when she saw me. Genuine warmth. Alina, Dr. Walsh, thank you so much for meeting me. Catherine, please. I surrendered the doctor years ago. She gestured to the seat across from her. Though I notice you kept yours. Good for you. We ordered coffee, made small talk about the weather, the community college, the state of science education. She was easy to talk to, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke. Finally, she set down her mug and looked at me directly. So, career challenges. Tell me. I'd planned this moment carefully, rehearsed what to say, how much to reveal. But sitting across from her, seeing the intelligence in her eyes and the sadness she tried to hide, I found myself telling the truth. Not all of it. Not yet, but enough. I've been working on a major research project for 5 years, I said quietly. It's good work, important work. But the credit is going to someone else, someone senior who positioned himself to take ownership. Catherine's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. A stillness that spoke volumes. Let me guess, she said softly. A male supervisor. 20+ years in the field. Charismatic. Good at making you feel valued right up until the moment he wasn't. Yes, she nodded slowly, looking out the window at the rain. I was warned about this, you know. When I was your age, an older woman researcher pulled me aside at a conference and told me, document everything, trust no one. Your ideas will be stolen if you're not careful. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I thought she was bitter, paranoid. I thought things were changing. They haven't. No. She looked back at me. They haven't. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Catherine asked the question I'd been waiting for. Who is it? Your supervisor. I met her eyes. Greg Morrison. The color drained from her face. For a long moment, she didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared at me like I'd reached across the table and slapped her. Then, very quietly, tell me everything. I did, all of it. The 5 years, the isolation, the conference room presentation, the third authorship offer. The pattern I'd discovered in his previous researchers. Catherine listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her tea mug like she needed the warmth. When I finished, she was quiet for so long I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Revealed too much. Miscalculated. Then she started laughing. Not happy laughter. The kind that comes when something is so absurd, so cosmically ironic, that your mind can't process it any other way. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her eyes. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at myself. At how goddamn predictable this all is. I don't understand. She looked at me with something like pity, or maybe recognition. Alina, why do you think I really left research? Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she set down her mug. I was 28, she began, her voice steady but distant. Like she was reading from a script she'd memorized long ago. Working on enzyme kinetics at a research institute in Boston. Brilliant work, if I'm allowed to say that about myself. work that could have changed how we understand metabolic disorders. She paused, looking out the window at the rain streaking down the glass. Greg was a postdoc in the adjacent lab, charming, ambitious. We started collaborating on a project that bridged our research areas. Then we started dating. Then we got married. Her smile was thin, sad. I was pregnant with our first son when my research started appearing in journals with Greg's name as first author. Papers based on my enzyme work, my methodology. My late nights in the lab, while morning sickness made me vomit between experiments. My stomach clenched. I confronted him, she continued. Just like you probably confronted him. He said the same things. I imagine that we were a team, that his name carried more weight with journals, would help both our careers. That I was being emotional, not understanding how academic politics worked. What did you do? I believed him. She laughed that terrible laugh again. Or maybe I chose to believe him because the alternative was too devastating. We had a baby, a mortgage, a life we were building together. So I convinced myself it was temporary, that I'd get my recognition eventually. She traced her finger along the rim of her mug, her eyes unfocused. Then I got pregnant again. And Greg's career exploded: papers, grants, speaking engagements. All built on research I'd contributed to, methodology I'd developed. By the time I realized what was happening, I was 32 with 2 children under 5, a gap in my publication record, and a husband who was considered a rising star in the field. You couldn't go back. Oh, I tried. Her voice hardened. When our youngest started kindergarten, I reached out to my old colleagues, applied for positions. But 7 years out of active research might as well be a lifetime. No recent publications, not under my name, anyway. References from people who remembered me as Greg Morrison's wife, rather than Dr. Catherine Walsh. She met my eyes, and I saw something there I recognized. The same fury I felt burning in my own chest. So I did what society expected. Volunteered at the boys' schools. Became a room mother. Learned to smile at faculty parties while Greg received awards for work I'd helped develop. Learned to introduce myself as Catherine instead of Dr. Walsh because it made other people more comfortable. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't be sorry. Her voice sharpened. Be angry, be strategic, be smarter than I was. She leaned forward. Alina, I gave up. I made peace with my choices because I thought they were my choices. But you still have options. You don't have children tying you to him. No shared mortgage. No 23 years of history that make leaving feel impossible. I don't want to just leave. I want him to pay for what he's done. Something flickered in Catherine's eyes. Something dangerous and alive. Then let me help you. We moved to Catherine Escara practical sedan that smelled like old coffee and textbooks because the coffee shop felt too exposed for what we needed to discuss. Rain drummed on the roof as Catherine pulled out her phone, scrolling through files. I kept records, she said quietly. I didn't know why at the time. Maybe some part of me knew I'd need them eventually. Documentation of my research. Lab notebooks from those early years. Email chains where Greg asked for my input on papers that later appeared with only his name. She showed me her phone. Dozens of scanned documents, photographs, emails dated back 20 years. I also know things about Greg that no one else does. His patterns, his vulnerabilities, where he cuts corners. Like what? Catherine smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Like the fact that he hasn't done hands-on research in over a decade. He hasn't even looked through a microscope in years. He wouldn't know how to run the experiments he claims to have designed. He relies entirely on people like you, brilliant researchers he can exploit. But he understands the theory. He can speak about it convincingly, because you explained it to him. Catherine's voice was sharp. Because you wrote the reports, created the presentations, did the intellectual heavy lifting while he memorized your words and claimed them as his own. She was right. Every breakthrough I'd explained to Greg in his office, thinking I was collaborating with a mentor. Every email where I'd detailed my methodology, believing transparency was good scientific practice. I'd been teaching him how to steal from me. Here's what most people don't know about Greg, Catherine continued. He's a coward. Absolutely terrified of being exposed as less brilliant than he pretends to be. His entire identity is wrapped up in being respected, admired, seen as a leader in the field, so we destroy his reputation. No. Catherine shook her head. We do something more elegant. We make him destroy it himself. She explained her idea carefully, precisely, like she was designing an experiment. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Greg was planning to present the cancer protein research at a major conference in June, the International Symposium on Cellular Biology. Thousands of researchers, including the editors from Nature Medicine. His moment of triumph. He'll present it exactly as he did to your board, Catherine said. Using your data, your methodology, your insights. But here's what he does unrealize. He does actually understand the work deeply enough to defend it. He's studied it thoroughly. Studying and understanding aren't the same thing. You lived this research for 5 years. Every decision point, every pivot, every failure that led to breakthrough. He's memorized the highlights. The PowerPoint version. I began to see where she was going. You're talking about the Q&A session. Exactly. Catherine's eyes gleamed. Conference presentations always include audience questions. Detailed, technical questions from experts in the field. Questions that require deep understanding to answer. But he could deflect. Say he needs to review the data. Offer to follow up later. He could, Catherine agreed. If he were smart. But Greg is arrogant. He believes he's mastered your work because he's given himself credit for creating it. When challenged, he won't back down, he'll bluff. Try to answer. And that's when he'll expose himself. We need someone to ask the right questions. Exactly, very specific. Technical questions that only someone intimately familiar with the research could answer. Questions about decision points in the methodology. Why you chose one approach over another. What the failed experiments revealed. My mind was already racing through possibilities. I could write the questions, but who asks them? Catherine smiled. Leave that to me. I still have colleagues in the field. People who owe me favors. People who would be very interested to know that Greg Morrison might not fully understand the research he's claiming as his own. We spent the next hour in that rain-soaked car, planning. Catherine pulled up the conference program. Identified the session where Greg would present, researched who else would be there. Dr. Jennifer Park will be attending, Catherine said, pointing to a name. She's a protein specialist from Stanford. Brilliant, thorough, and has a well-known distaste for academic fraud. If she hears that there might be credibility issues with a high-profile presentation, she come prepared with questions. How do you know her? We were in graduate school together. She was one of the people who tried to convince me to fight for my work instead of accepting what happened. Catherine's voice softened. I didn't listen then, but I can now. I looked at this woman, this stranger, who'd become an ally in a single afternoon and felt something shift inside me. I wasn't alone anymore. There's something else we need, I said slowly. Insurance, in case the conference exposure isn't enough. What are you thinking? Greg told me I'd be listed as third author on the Nature Medicine submission. That submission includes detailed methodology, data, experimental design. If we can demonstrate that he doesn't actually understand the work he's submitting, Nature Medicine would pull the paper, Catherine finished, and investigate. Academic journals don't tolerate fraud. The scandal would end his career. But we need proof. Documentation showing he couldn't have done this work alone. That someone else. That you did the work, Catherine interrupted firmly. Stop diminishing yourself, Alina. You're not someone else. You're the researcher who created this. Own that. Her words hit me like cold water. She was right. Even in planning my revenge, I was still minimizing my own role. Still thinking of myself as assistant rather than architect. I have the documentation, I said, stronger now. Lab notebooks, time-stamped files, even voice memos where I worked through problems. Good, we'll need all of it. Catherine pulled out a notebook paper, not digital, the old-school kind scientists still preferred for thinking, and started writing. Here's what we do. First, we prepare the conference questions. Second, we compile your evidence. Third, we reach out to Dr. Park and a few other key researchers, subtly suggesting they might want to pay special attention to Greg's presentation. And fourth, she looked up at me, something fierce and protective in her eyes. Fourth, we attend the conference. Both of us, we watch him fall. And when he does, when he's exposed in front of everyone who matters, you step forward with your documentation and claim what's yours. The next 8 weeks were the most purposeful of my life. I'd spent 5 years in singular focus on research. Now, I channeled that same intensity into something else. Justice. Catherine and I met 3 times a week, always in different locations. Coffee shops in neighborhoods far from Meridian Biotech. A library in a suburb 40 minutes away. Once, memorably, in a park where we sat on wet benches and went over documents while joggers passed by, oblivious to the conspiracy being hatched between 2 women with notebooks and highlighters. She was meticulous. Every question we prepared for the conference had to meet specific criteria. Technical enough to require deep understanding, but not so obscure that the audience wouldn't recognize the significance. Questions that would sound like genuine scientific curiosity, not attacks. You want him to hang himself with his own inadequacy, Catherine explained, marking up a draft of questions with her red pen, the same pen she told me that she'd used to grade lab reports back when she was still Dr. Walsh. The audience needs to see him fumble. Not once, but repeatedly. A pattern of not quite right answers that makes people start wondering. I compiled my evidence with the same precision. Every lab notebook page photographed and dated. Every computer file backed up with metadata, showing creation, timestamps. Every email chain where I'd explained methodologies to Greg, helpfully providing the very knowledge he'd later claim as his own insight. The most damning evidence came from my voice memos. I'd forgotten about them, dozens of recordings I'd made late at night when I was too tired to write but needed to capture thoughts before sleep claimed them. My voice, sometimes hoarse from exhaustion. Working through problems, the binding mechanism isn't working because we're approaching the protein structure wrong. It's not about the primary sequence, it's about the tertiary folding under stress conditions. Need to redesign the entire experimental framework. Breakthrough tonight. The 2.3-second window appears consistently across all cancer cell lines. This is the vulnerability we've been looking for. Greg won't believe this when I show him tomorrow. That last one hurt to hear. The excitement in my voice. The naive trust. Catherine listened to several recordings, her expression growing darker with each one. This is your thoughts in real time, she said quietly. Your problem-solving process. This isn't something someone could fake or memorize. This is what actual research sounds like. While we prepared, I maintained my facade at work. Showed up on time. Smiled at colleagues. Pretended everything was fine. Greg was busy basking in his upcoming triumph. The conference presentation was scheduled for June 15, 3 months away. Nature Medicine had fast-tracked the review process for his submission, eager to publish such promising research. He'd already given 2 interviews to science journalists about the breakthrough in cancer therapy. In every article, my name appeared as a footnote, with technical assistance from Dr. Alina Voss. Technical assistance. I cut out each article, added them to my evidence file. Let the rage fuel my focus. One afternoon in early May, Greg called me into his office. I went, carrying my coffee mug like a shield. "Alina," he said, all false warmth. "I wanted to let you know I've recommended you for a position in the secondary research division. It's a lateral move, same pay, but it would give you a fresh start on new projects." Translation: he was removing me before the Nature Medicine publication, ensuring I'd be too far from the cancer protein project to cause problems. When would this transfer happen? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. End of June. After the conference, he smiled. "I thought you'd appreciate the timing. Clean break, new beginning." "That's very thoughtful of you." He didn't hear the ice beneath my words. Or if he did, he didn't care. Catherine reached out to Dr. Jennifer Park in mid-May. I wasn't privy to that conversation, but Catherine reported back with grim satisfaction. "Jennifer remembers Greg from years ago," she said. "Never liked him. Said he always had a habit of appearing on collaborative papers while contributing minimal actual work." She smiled. When I mentioned he was presenting solo research on cancer proteins, she got very interested. Especially when I noted that the methodology seemed remarkably sophisticated for someone who hasn't done hands-on lab work in a decade. "Did you tell her about me?" "Not yet. She knows something isn't right, but I kept it vague. Let her think she's uncovering the truth herself. People are more invested when they feel like they're the detective." Catherine had also reached out to 3 other researchers who would be attending the conference. Planted seeds, asked casual questions. Mentioned she'd heard interesting things about Morrison's presentation and they might want to prepare thoughtful questions. We weren't leaving anything to chance. June arrived with unseasonable heat. The International Symposium on Cellular Biology was being held in Chicago at a massive convention center, the kind of sterile, air-conditioned space where careers were made and broken over the course of 15-minute presentations. Greg flew out 3 days early for preliminary meetings and press interviews. I took vacation time and booked my own flight, my own hotel room 3 blocks from the convention center. Catherine met me at the airport. We'd never discussed whether she'd actually come, but I wasn't surprised to see her there. Wearing slacks and a blazer that made her look like the researcher she'd once been. "Ready?" she asked. "No," I admitted, "but I'm here anyway." We checked into our hotel's separate buildings, maintaining plausible deniability, and met that evening in a hotel bar that smelled of gin and desperation. Catherine spread out the final list of questions on the table between us. "Jennifer will ask the first one," she said, pointing. "Something technical but reasonable. Give him a chance to answer competently. And if he does, he won't, not fully. He'll get the broad strokes right. He's studied your work enough for that, but he'll miss the nuance, the why behind the what." She moved to the second question. "Then Marcus Wong will ask about the failed experiments. Why you abandoned the initial binding approach in favor of the tertiary structure model." I'd provided that information to Catherine weeks ago. The false starts, the dead ends, the experiments that consumed months before I realized I was asking the wrong questions. Those failures were crucial to understanding how the successful model emerged. Greg didn't know about them. They'd never made it into the final reports he'd read. Third question comes from Jennifer again, Catherine continued. More technical. About the specific parameters of the 2.3-second vulnerability window. Why that precise duration? What happens at 2.2 seconds versus 2.4? I'd spent 6 weeks isolating that exact measurement. Could explain the methodology in my sleep. Greg had nodded along when I'd presented it, said fascinating, and moved on to ask about applications. Fourth question. Catherine paused. Fourth question is yours. I looked up sharply. Mine. You'll be in the audience. You'll raise your hand and ask about the decision to use a specific computational algorithm over the standard modeling approach. Her eyes held mine. It's a legitimate question. One any researcher in the field might ask. But it requires understanding not just what algorithm you used, but why. The theoretical justification. He won't know. Exactly. And when he can't answer, when he fumbles or gives a vague response, you stand up. Catherine's voice was steady, certain. You stand up and you introduce yourself. Dr. Alina Voss, senior researcher at Meridian Biotech. And you offer to answer the question. Because you developed the methodology. My heart hammered against my ribs. The audience will think you're being helpful, Catherine continued. Stepping in to support your supervisor. But when you answer with complete fluency, with depth and detail he couldn't match, people will start wondering. And then Jennifer will ask the final question, which is, Catherine's smile was sharp as a scalpel. She asked Greg to describe the actual hands-on experimental process, the day-to-day work, the practical challenges, the kind of thing only someone who actually did the research could articulate. He can't. No, Catherine agreed. He can't. And that's when it all falls apart. The night before Greg's presentation, I couldn't sleep. Lay in my hotel bed watching shadows from passing cars slide across the ceiling, my mind running through every possible outcome. What if he answered competently? What if the audience didn't care? What if I stood up and my voice failed, my courage crumbled? What if I'd sacrificed 5 years for nothing, and tomorrow would be just another confirmation that the system protected men like Greg Morrison? At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Text from Catherine, can't sleep either. Meet me in the lobby. I found her there 15 minutes later, both of us in sweatpants and hotel slippers, looking like refugees from some disaster we were too tired to name. We sat in a corner near a dying plant and a coffee station that had been closed for hours. I keep thinking about timing, Catherine said quietly. If I'd fought back 20 years ago, maybe things would be different for me. For you, for all the women who came after. You were surviving, I told her. That's not the same as giving up, isn't it? We sat in silence for a moment. Tomorrow, I said finally, regardless of what happens, thank you. For believing me. For helping me. For being what I needed when I needed it. Catherine reached over and squeezed my hand. Her grip was strong, certain. Tomorrow, she said, we end this pattern. One way or another. June 15th dawned, clear and merciless. I dressed carefully that morning. Not the casual researcher uniform of slacks and a cardigan I usually wore, but a navy suit I'd bought specifically for this moment. Professional, authoritative. The kind of outfit that said scientist rather than assistant. Catherine met me in the convention center lobby at 8 a.m. The space was already filling with researchers, hundreds of them, name tags clipped to lanyards, coffee cups in hand, that particular energy of people gathering to share knowledge and compete for recognition. Greg's presentation was scheduled for 10:30 in the main conference hall. Prime timing. Maximum attendance. We found seats in the middle of the auditorium, not too close, not too far back. Strategic positioning. Catherine sat on my right. 2 seats to my left. I recognized Dr. Jennifer Park from the photo Catherine had shown me. A slight Korean woman in her 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression of sharp intelligence. She caught my eye, nodded slightly. Catherine had briefed her last night on who I was, what to watch for. The session began at 10, with 2 other presentations. I didn't hear a word of them. My heart was a drumbeat in my ears, my hands cold despite the warmth of the crowded room. At 10-20-8, Greg Morrison walked onto the stage. He looked exactly as he always did, confident, polished, commanding, silver hair perfectly styled, navy suit that probably cost more than my month's rent, that easy smile that made people want to believe him. The moderator introduced him with glowing praise. Dr. Morrison's groundbreaking work in cancer protein research promises to revolutionize our approach to targeted therapy. Please welcome him as he presents Mapping Cellular Vulnerability, a new framework for cancer intervention. Applause filled the auditorium. I didn't clap. Greg began his presentation with a joke, something about protein structures and bad relationships, that got polite laughter. Then he launched into the content, my content. Every slide was familiar. Graphs I'd generated, data I'd collected, conclusions I'd drawn at 3 a.m. while the lab hummed around me in darkness. He presented it smoothly, confidently, like a man who'd lived this research. But I noticed something. Something I'd never caught before because I'd been too close, too invested. He was performative. He hit the major points with polish, but there was no love in it. No genuine excitement. When I talked about my research, even exhausted and frustrated, there was passion. The work mattered not just because it was important, but because I cared about the questions it answered. Greg presented it like a product launch. Impressive, soulless. The presentation lasted 20 minutes. When he finished, the moderator opened the floor for questions. This was it. Jennifer Park's hand went up immediately. The moderator called on her. Dr. Park, Stanford University. She introduced herself, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. Fascinating work, Dr. Morrison. I'm curious about your choice to use the tertiary protein folding model as your primary analytical framework. That's a departure from standard approaches in this field. What led you to that specific methodology? It was a gentle question, a softball, giving him a chance to demonstrate understanding. Greg smiled, comfortable. Excellent question. The tertiary folding model provided greater sensitivity to stress-induced structural changes, which are critical when examining cancer cell behavior under therapeutic pressure. The standard approaches were simply too limited in scope. A competent answer. Surface level, correct. But missing everything. Jennifer nodded slowly. Could you elaborate on the specific limitations you found in the standard approaches? What markers were you tracking that required the shift? Greg's smile tightened fractionally. The limitation was primarily in temporal resolution. We needed to capture changes occurring in microsecond intervals. And the standard models weren't designed for that granularity. Wrong. Not entirely wrong, but wrong enough that I saw Jennifer's eyebrow raise slightly. The temporal resolution wasn't the issue. The issue was that standard models treated protein folding as static snapshots when cancer cells existed in constant dynamic flux. I'd developed the tertiary model specifically to capture that movement, that continuous state of becoming rather than being. Marcus Wong's hand went up next to a protein researcher from MIT, whom Catherine had contacted. The moderator called on him. Dr. Huang, MIT. I'm interested in your experimental timeline. You mention abandoning initial binding approaches in favor of the tertiary structure model. Can you walk us through what those failed experiments revealed? How they informed your eventual methodology? The auditorium went very quiet. This was the question that required intimacy with the work. The kind of knowledge that came from living through failures, not reading about successes. Greg paused. Not long, maybe 3 seconds, but in a room full of researchers accustomed to rapid-fire technical discussion, it was noticeable. The initial binding experiments showed promise but lacked reproducibility, he said carefully. We found that focusing on static binding events missed the dynamic nature of protein behavior in cancerous environments. The failures were instructive in demonstrating the need for a more holistic modeling approach. It was the kind of answer a supervisor might give. Broad strokes, big picture, missing the specificity of someone who'd actually run the experiments. I'd spent 4 months on those initial binding experiments. 4 months of failure that had driven me to tears more than once. The problem wasn't lack of reproducibility. The experiments were depressingly reproducible. They were just answering the wrong question. I'd realized, finally, that I was trying to catch a photograph of something that only existed in motion. You can't understand a dance by studying a single frozen frame. Jennifer's hand went up again. The moderator hesitated. She'd already asked a question, but Jennifer's reputation in the field carried weight. He nodded to her. Following up on Dr. Huang's question, she said, and there was something new in her voice now. Sharpness. The 2.3-second vulnerability window you identified is remarkably precise. Can you explain the methodology that allowed such exact measurement? Specifically, what happens at 2.2 seconds versus 2.4 seconds? Greg's confidence was fraying visibly now. I could see it in the way he shifted his weight, the way his smile became more fixed. The 2.3-second window represents the optimal intervention point based on our computational models, he said. The precise parameters were determined through extensive simulation and empirical validation. But what are those parameters? Jennifer pressed. What specific cellular processes are occurring during that window that make it uniquely vulnerable? Greg opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at his notes. The NTT configuration during that window exhibits structural instability, that which proteins. Another voice from the audience. A researcher I didn't recognize. You've identified multiple proteins in your model. Which specific ones exhibit the instability, and what's the mechanism? The room was shifting. I could feel it. The audience was no longer listening with admiration, but with skepticism. Watching a man stumble over questions about work he supposedly conducted. My hands trembled in my lap. Catherine's hand found mine, squeezed once. Hard. This was the moment. I raised my hand. The moderator's eyes scanned the room, looking for a friendlier question. Perhaps. But I kept my hand up, steady, and finally he nodded to me. I stood, felt every eye in the auditorium turn to me. Dr. Alina Voss, Meridian Biotech, I said. And my voice came out stronger than I expected. Clear, certain. Dr. Morrison, I have a question about the computational algorithm selection. You used a modified Monte Carlo simulation approach, rather than the standard molecular dynamics modeling. That's a sophisticated choice that significantly impacted the accuracy of your predictions. Can you explain the theoretical justification for that decision? I watched Greg's face as recognition hit him. He knew who I was, of course, but he hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected me to be here, to speak up, to ask a question he couldn't answer, because I hadn't just asked about what algorithm was used. I'd asked why. The kind of why that required understanding the deep theoretical foundations, the alternatives I'd considered and rejected, the specific weaknesses in molecular dynamics modeling that made Monte Carlo superior for this particular application. The Monte Carlo approach, Greg began, his voice less steady now, provided better statistical sampling for the protein configurations we were modeling. But why? I pressed, still standing. Molecular dynamics is standard in protein research. What specific limitation did you identify that made it inadequate? Silence. Greg looked at me across the auditorium, and I saw the moment he understood. This wasn't just a difficult question. This was a trap. And he was already caught in it. The computational efficiency was a factor, he tried. And the statistical robustness, those are advantages of the outcome, I said quietly. I'm asking about the theoretical justification. What about the physics of this particular system made Monte Carlo the correct choice? He couldn't answer. The room felt it. 400 researchers watching a man fail to explain his own work. I sat down slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Jennifer Park stood immediately. "Dr. Morrison," she said, her voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence. "Perhaps you could walk us through the actual experimental process, the day-to-day work. When you were running these simulations, what were the practical challenges? What unexpected issues arose in the lab?" It was the killing blow, delivered with surgical precision, because Greg Morrison hadn't been in a lab in 10 years, hadn't run a simulation himself, had troubleshot equipment failures, or wrestled with programming bugs at midnight, or discovered that the cooling system was interfering with data collection. He hadn't lived this research. I had. Greg stood at the podium, silent, for what felt like an eternity. The moderator shifted uncomfortably. The audience waited. Somewhere in the back of the auditorium, someone coughed. The practical challenges, Greg finally said, were primarily related to computational resources and data management. It was the answer of someone who'd read about research, not done it. Jennifer Park didn't sit down. "Could you be more specific? What data management issues? What solutions did you implement?" "We upgraded our server capacity. Optimized the code for parallel processing." True, but generic. The kind of thing anyone could say. "And the unexpected issues?" Jennifer pressed. "Research always produces surprises. What surprised you in this work?" I watched Greg's face cycle through calculations. What could he say that would sound authentic? What detail could he offer that wouldn't reveal how little he actually knew? "There were several unexpected findings," he said vaguely. "The protein behavior under certain stress conditions." "Which conditions?" Another voice from the audience. The questions were coming faster now. Researchers sensing blood in the water. "The thermal stress parameters, what temperature ranges? What calibration protocols did you use? How did you account for environmental variables?" The questions piled on top of each other, technical and precise, the kind of granular detail that only someone who'd actually performed the work could answer fluently. Greg was drowning. The moderator intervened, his voice strained. "Perhaps we should allow Dr. Morrison to. I can answer those questions." I was standing again. I hadn't planned to speak, hadn't rehearsed this moment. But my body moved before my mind caught up, pulled by something deeper than strategy. The room went silent. "I'm sorry," the moderator said. "The questions about methodology, about practical challenges, about the experimental process." My voice was steady now, calm, drawing on 5 years of absolute certainty about this work. "I can answer them, because I developed this research." The silence deepened, became something almost physical. Greg's face went white. "Alina, Dr. Voss," I corrected quietly. "And I think it's time we had an honest conversation about who actually conducted this research." The moderator looked between us, clearly lost. "Dr. Morrison. Is there something?" The thermal stress parameters ranged from 37 to 42 degrees Celsius, I said, my voice clear and carrying. "We calibrated using a dual-sensor thermocycler with redundant monitoring, because initial tests showed that even 0.2-degree variations affected protein folding patterns. The environmental variables were controlled using a custom-built isolation chamber I designed specifically for this project because standard equipment couldn't maintain the stability we needed. I paused, looking directly at Greg. I spent 6 weeks building that chamber. Worked with engineering to customize the humidity controls. Ran validation tests every morning for a month to ensure consistency. Dr. Morrison, do you remember what material we used for the internal lining? He stared at me, speechless. It was borosilicate glass, I continued. Because we needed something that would unleach particles into the environment but could withstand the temperature fluctuations. We tried stainless steel first, but it created microcondensation that threw off the readings. Every researcher in that room knew exactly what I was doing. I was demonstrating intimate knowledge that only came from hands-on work. The kind of granular, tedious, specific detail that you couldn't get from reading reports or listening to presentations. The kind of detail that proved I'd lived this research. Dr. Jennifer Park stood slowly. Dr. Voss, are you saying you conducted the experimental work on this project? I'm saying I conducted all of it. I pulled out my phone, hands surprisingly steady, and held it up. I have documentation, lab notebooks, time-stamped computer files, voice memos recorded while I was working through methodological problems. 5 years of evidence showing this research was mine. This is highly irregular, the moderator began. What's irregular? Jennifer interrupted, her voice sharp. Is a senior researcher being unable to answer basic questions about work he claims to have conducted. What's irregular is someone presenting research without understanding its fundamental methodology. Other researchers were standing now, voices rising. I knew Morrison's publication record had gaps. This explains the inconsistencies in his previous papers. We should demand an investigation. Greg found his voice, finally, desperate. Alina is a valued member of my research team. Of course, she conducted the hands-on work. That's how research collaborations function. But the theoretical framework, the strategic direction, the intellectual, the theoretical framework was mine too. Catherine's voice cut through the chaos. She stood from her seat next to me, and I saw several older researchers recognize her. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Catherine Walsh. I thought she left the field. That Greg Morrison's wife, Catherine, walked to the aisle, her voice calm but carrying an edge that could cut glass. My name is Dr. Catherine Walsh. 23 years ago, I was a biochemist working on enzyme kinetics. I developed groundbreaking research that appeared in journals with Greg Morrison's name as primary author. Research I conducted. Methodologies I created. Insights I generated. The auditorium was absolutely silent now. I said nothing. Catherine continued. I convinced myself it was collaboration, that his name would help our careers. That I was being emotional and not understanding academic politics. Her voice hardened. I was wrong. And I've spent 2 decades watching him follow the same pattern. Finding brilliant researchers, exploiting their work, taking credit while they do the labor. She looked at Greg, and I saw 20 years of suppressed rage in her eyes. I kept records, she said quietly. Documentation from my own research. And when Dr. Voss contacted me, I recognized the pattern immediately. Because I lived it first. Greg's face had gone from white to gray. Catherine, this isn't you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Her voice was ice. I understand that you built your entire career on stolen work. Mine, Elena's, how many others? A man near the front stood someone in his 60s, distinguished looking. I worked under Morrison 15 years ago. Published a paper on cellular respiration, where my methodology appeared under his name. I was told it was standard practice. Another voice from the back. He did the same thing to me. Gene therapy research. I was listed as third author on work I'd designed. The room erupted. Researchers standing, shouting questions, demanding answers. The moderator had lost complete control of the session. Security was moving toward the stage, unsure what to do with a scandal unfolding in real time. And Greg Morrison stood at the podium, his carefully constructed reputation crumbling like sand. Jennifer Park made her way to where Catherine and I stood. Up close, she was smaller than I expected, but her presence was commanding. "Dr. Voss," she said formally, "I'm going to need to see your documentation. If what you're saying is true and, I believe it is, Nature Medicine needs to be contacted immediately. They cannot publish research based on fraudulent authorship. I have everything," I told her. 5 years of evidence. Good. She turned to Catherine. "Dr. Walsh, I am sorry, I didn't believe you 20 years ago when you tried to tell me something wasn't right. I dismissed it as relationship drama. I was wrong." Catherine's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. "You believe us now. That's what matters." The auditorium was chaos. Researchers forming groups, arguing, filming on their phones. This wasn't just a scandal, it was going viral in By evening, every major research institution would know what had happened. Greg was being escorted off the stage by security. As he passed our row, he looked at me. Not with anger, not even with hatred, with defeat. "You've destroyed my career," he said quietly. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "You destroyed it yourself. I just stopped letting you destroy mine." The next 3 hours were a blur. Conference organizers sequestered me in a private room. Jennifer Park and 2 other senior researchers reviewed my documentation with the intensity of people conducting a criminal investigation. They went through lab notebooks, computer files, voice memos, every piece of evidence I'd compiled. Catherine sat beside me through all of it, her hand occasionally finding mine when the questions got particularly intense. "This voice memo," one researcher said, playing back my recording from 2 years ago. "You're working through the Monte Carlo algorithm decision. The exact question you asked Morrison during the presentation." "Yes. And this is timestamped at." He checked. 2:17 a.m., March 8, 3 years ago. I did most of my thinking late at night. The lab was quiet. He nodded slowly. "Dr. Voss, I've been in research for 30 years. I can tell you with certainty, this is your work. No question." By hour 3, they'd reached a consensus. Jennifer Park looked at me with something like awe. "Dr. Voss, this is extraordinary research, genuinely groundbreaking. And the documentation you've provided proves beyond any doubt that you're the primary researcher, the intellectual architect. What happens now?" "Now," Jennifer smiled grimly. "Now we contact Nature Medicine and inform them their submission is fraudulent. We contact Meridian Biotech and recommend a full investigation of Morrison's publication history. We contact every journal that's published his work and suggest they review authorship claims." "And Dr. Voss's work?" Catherine asked quietly. "Will be published under her name, as it should have been from the beginning." Jennifer looked at me seriously. "You'll need to resubmit through proper channels, with you as primary author. Sole author, if that's what the evidence supports. Sole author. 5 years of work, finally acknowledged." I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for so long that even setting it down requires effort. "There's one more thing," Jennifer said. "This is going to be a story. Major science publications, mainstream media. The narrative of a woman researcher exposing systematic academic fraud. It's compelling. You'll be contacted by journalists, invited to speak at conferences. Your career is about to change dramatically. I thought about that, about becoming the face of a movement, about my mother, who died while I was too buried in work to be present, who would have been proud to see me stand up for myself. I'll handle it, I said quietly. Whatever comes next, I'll handle it. The aftermath unfolded like a slow earthquake, tremors that started small and grew until the ground itself shifted. Within 24 hours, the video footage from the conference had spread across academic networks. Researchers shared it with colleagues. Colleagues shared it with their departments. By the end of the week, mainstream media picked it up. Scientist exposes decades of stolen research, the hidden cost of academic fraud. How one woman brought down a career built on lies. My phone became unusable. Emails flooded in faster than I could read them. Interview requests from Scientific American, The Atlantic, NPR. Messages from researchers I'd never met, sharing their own stories of stolen credit, suppressed authorship, careers derailed by people like Greg Morrison. You gave us permission to speak up, one woman wrote. I've been silent for 15 years. Not anymore. Nature Medicine pulled Greg's submission within 48 hours. Their statement was brief and devastating. Upon review of authorship claims, we have determined significant irregularities that prevent publication. A full investigation is underway. Meridian Biotech placed Greg on administrative leave the same day. The company's PR statement was carefully worded, taking allegations seriously, committed to research integrity, but the message was clear. Greg Morrison's reign was over. I should have felt satisfaction, victory. Instead, I felt hollowed out. Like I'd spent so much energy on rage and strategy that now, with the battle won, I didn't know what to do with the quiet. Catherine and I flew back from Chicago together. At the airport, while we waited for our flight, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Are you all right? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. I thought I'd feel different, more whole, maybe. But mostly, I just feel tired. She nodded, slowly. Revenge doesn't heal the wound. It just stops the bleeding. We sat in silence for a moment, watching travelers rush past with their rolling suitcases and their uncomplicated lives. What will you do now? I asked her. Catherine smiled, a real smile, the first I'd seen from her. I've been offered a position at the community college, biochemistry department. It's not high-level research, but I'd be teaching, mentoring young women who are exactly where I was at their age, warning them, preparing them. That's important work. So is yours. She looked at me seriously. You have a platform now, Alina, a voice people will listen to. Don't waste it. The formal investigation at Meridian Biotech took 6 weeks. They reviewed every publication Greg had authored in his 23 years at the company, interviewed former researchers, examined authorship claims, requested documentation. What they found was systematic, deliberate fraud spanning 2 decades. 12 researchers had been exploited the same way I had. Some had left the field entirely. Others had rebuilt careers elsewhere, carrying the bitterness of stolen recognition. One woman had documented everything but never reported it, because who would believe me over him? The board called me in for a meeting in late July, the same conference room where Greg had presented my work as his own. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Margaret Chen, the CFO who'd questioned my role that day, sat at the head of the table. Her expression was grave. Dr. Voss, on behalf of Meridian Biotech, I want to offer you a formal apology. We failed you. We failed to recognize the pattern of Dr. Morrison's behavior. We failed to protect our researchers. We failed to verify authorship claims. That failure is institutional, and it stops now. I nodded, waiting. We're offering you the position of principal investigator for the Cancer Protein Project. Full control. Your name as primary author on all publications. A research team of your choosing. Increased budget and lab resources. She paused. We're also offering a formal settlement regarding the intellectual property rights to your research. The details are outlined here. She slid a document across the table. I scanned it quickly. The number was substantial. More money than I'd earned in 5 years combined. And Greg Morrison? I asked quietly. Terminated. He's also facing potential legal action from several former researchers. The scientific community has made their position clear. He won't work in research again. I thought about that. Greg Morrison, who'd built everything on other people's work, reduced to nothing. His marriage likely destroyed. Catherine had filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. His sons learning their father was a fraud. His legacy erased. I'd wanted him to feel what I felt. Mission accomplished. So why did it still hurt? I accepted Meridian's offer, but with conditions. I wanted an ethics oversight committee established. Mandatory documentation of research contributions. Anonymous reporting channels for researchers who felt exploited. Regular audits of authorship claims. We want to prevent another Greg Morrison, I told Margaret Chen. That requires systemic change, not just punishment after the fact. She agreed to all of it. I also requested something unusual. I wanted to hire Dr. Sarah Chen, the researcher who'd warned me to document everything. The woman who'd been Greg's victim 15 years ago and had tried to warn me with a single sentence. She accepted the position immediately. I never thought I'd get back into research, she told me over the phone, her voice breaking. I thought that door was closed forever. Doors don't close, I said. They're just guarded by people who shouldn't have keys. The cancer protein research was published in Nature Medicine in October under my name. Dr. Alina Voss, primary author. Dr. Sarah Chen, secondary author for her contributions to the revised methodology. Catherine Walsh listed in acknowledgments for invaluable strategic guidance and support. The day it came out, I bought a physical copy of the journal, held it in my hands, saw my name in print. I'd imagined this moment for 5 years, thought it would feel like triumph, like validation, like everything had been worth it. Instead, it felt quiet, peaceful, like finally setting down a weight I'd carried so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I called my sister that evening. Rachel, who'd been at our mother's bedside when I wasn't, who'd held Mom's hand and heard her ask for me. I saw the publication, Rachel said softly. Mom would have been so proud. I wish she was here to see it. She is, Alina. She is. I wanted to believe that. Chose to believe it. 6 months after the conference, I received an unexpected email. It was from Greg Morrison. I almost deleted it without reading. Catherine, who I'd become close with during the investigation, advised me to ignore it. He doesn't deserve your attention, she said. But curiosity won. The email was short. Alina, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I understand what I did. Not just to you, but to Catherine, to Sarah, to every researcher whose work I stole. I told myself it was collaboration, that I was contributing strategic vision, that my name would help the research reach wider audiences. I told myself these things so often I believed them. But watching you stand up in that auditorium, watching you reclaim your work with such clarity and confidence, I saw myself clearly for the first time. I saw what I'd become. You didn't just expose fraud, You exposed me to myself. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledgement that you changed something, not just in the field, but in one person who desperately needed to change. I hope your research saves lives. It deserves to. GM, I read it 3 times. Then I deleted it. Because forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. And his redemption wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to the work. To the researchers I was now mentoring. To the women who reached out, saying this happened to me too, and needed someone to believe them. My responsibility was to the future, not the past. A year after the conference, I gave a keynote speech at the same symposium where everything had unfolded. The auditorium was packed, not just with researchers, but with students, journalists, advocates for research ethics reform. The title of my talk, Whose Name is on Your Work? I stood at the same podium where Greg had stood, where he'd presented my research as his own. The symmetry was deliberate. I talked about the cancer protein research, yes. But mostly, I talked about the invisible architecture of science, the credit economy that determines whose names appear on papers, whose careers advance, whose contributions are remembered. Research is collaborative, I said, looking out at hundreds of faces. But collaboration requires honesty. It requires giving credit where credit is due. It requires acknowledging that the person running experiments at midnight, troubleshooting equipment failures, redesigning methodologies when initial approaches fail, that person is not providing technical assistance. They're conducting the research. I paused, letting that sink in. I'm standing here today not because I'm exceptional, but because I had evidence, documentation, support from people like Dr. Catherine Walsh and Dr. Jennifer Park who believed me. Most researchers who experience authorship theft don't have that. They suffer in silence because speaking up feels impossible. I pulled out my phone, held it up. This device contains 5 years of voice memos. Thoughts I recorded at 2 a.m. because I was too tired to write, but needed to capture ideas before sleep stole them. Those memos proved I developed this research. They saved my career. I looked directly at the young researchers in the front rows. Document everything. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And most importantly, your work has value. Your contributions matter. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The applause started slowly, then built. Researchers standing, students standing. A room full of people who'd lived versions of my story, or feared they would. Catherine was in the audience, tears streaming down her face, clapping until her hands must have hurt. This, I thought. This is what the work was for. 2 years have passed since that conference in Chicago. The cancer protein research I developed has moved into clinical trials. Real patients, real hope. Every month, I receive updates from the medical teams using my methodology success rates. Refinements, lives potentially saved. My name is on that work, now, permanently, irrevocably. But if I'm honest, the publication in Nature Medicine isn't what changed me. The recognition, the keynote speeches, the interviews with major science publications, none of that healed the wound that 5 years of exploitation carved into my sense of self. What healed me was something quieter. It was Sarah Chen, thriving in my research lab, publishing her own papers, reclaiming the career she thought she'd lost forever. It was the young woman who approached me after a conference, hands shaking, and whispered, "My supervisor is doing to me what Morrison did to you. I documented everything because of your story. I'm filing a complaint tomorrow." It was Catherine, teaching biochemistry to community college students, many of them women returning to education after years away, telling them, "You are not too old. You are not too late. You are exactly where you need to be. It was the Ethics Oversight Committee at Meridian Biotech. Imperfect, still learning, but fundamentally changing how research contributions are documented and credited. Small changes, quiet victories, the kind that don't make headlines but shift the foundation beneath our feet. I think about my mother sometimes, how she died asking for me while I was in a lab, convinced the work was too important to interrupt. I was wrong about that. The work is important. Saving lives matters. Scientific discovery matters. But so does being present for the people who love you. So does building relationships that extend beyond professional ambition. So does living a life, not just documenting one. I have dinner with Marcus now, occasionally. We're not together too much history, too much hurt, but we're friends. He was right about revenge changing people. It did change me, but not in the way he feared. It taught me that justice and healing aren't the same thing. Justice is external. It's standing in an auditorium and reclaiming your work. It's watching someone face consequences for their actions. It's seeing systems change because you refused to stay silent. Healing is internal. It's learning to value yourself, even when others don't. It's building community with people who've survived similar battles. It's choosing, every day, to keep creating, even when you've been told your creations don't belong to you. I got justice. But I had to find healing on my own. The cancer protein research continues. My team has expanded 7 researchers now, all credited appropriately, all treated with the respect I was denied. We're close to a breakthrough in application protocols, close to moving from potentially life-saving to actively saving lives. When that happens, and it will, my mother's absence will ache. She should be here to see it. To know that her daughter, who missed her final moments for this work, actually accomplished something worth the sacrifice. Except no work is worth that sacrifice. I know that now. I visit her grave more often these days. Bring flowers. Sit in the grass and tell her about the research, yes, but also about the small things. The dinner I had with Rachel last week. The student who thanked me for believing in her. The way the lab smells like coffee and possibility every morning. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I tell her headstone every time. I'm sorry I chose wrong. And every time, I hear her voice in my memory. The way she sounded on our last phone call. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Changing the world. I didn't change the world, Mom, but I changed my corner of it. Maybe that's enough. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you're working in any field where your contributions are being minimized, stolen, or erased or not imagining it, your instincts are correct. Trust them. Document everything. Time-stamped files, lab notebooks, voice memos, emails. Create an evidence trail that can't be disputed. Find your people. Your Catherine Walsh, your Jennifer Park, your Marcus. The ones who'll believe you when speaking up feels impossible. They exist, I promise. And remember, recognition delayed is not recognition denied, it's just delayed. Your work has value because you created it, not because someone powerful acknowledged it. That truth exists independent of anyone's validation. The system that allowed Greg Morrison to thrive for 23 years is still broken. But it's breaking differently now because people are watching, people are questioning, people are demanding better. You can be part of that change. Or you can be the reason for it. Either way, your name belongs on your work. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar, or if you know someone who has, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had your work stolen? Your contributions minimized? What did you do? What do you wish you'd done? And for those of you still in the thick of it, still deciding whether to speak up or stay silent, what's holding you back? Maybe we can help. Sometimes the bravest thing we do is tell the truth about what happened to us. Sometimes that truth changes everything. Thank you for listening to my story, for witnessing what happened, for believing that it mattered. Because it did, and so do you.